Hello, I'm Thomas Kemeny. I think that's how it's pronounced. Author of the book Junior. Here with a bunch of other advertising authors, and here to talk to you about getting into the business and getting the most out of the business, and how to just simply do more meaningful work. So let's get into it.
There's great books everywhere. What need did you see that you thought you needed to fill with Junior?
There are great books for how to get into advertising, understand the industry, what the hell the industry is, how to get a job. And that's, Pick Me or Hey, What Will Squeeze This or Chew With Your Mind Open. I think where my book sort of starts is where those books stop. This book is for people who are doing the work, who are engaged in it day to day. It's a lot of it's very focused on copywriting and not in a sort of copywriting is important. Words are important. Like some of it gets very like almost clinical of like, oh, you could do this and shift this word here, and then suddenly it's a better thing. It gets into that kind of detail and how to sort of approach different ways to approach writing.
Yeah, I love the just how granular it is. It really is a how-to in the truest sense of the word.
Yeah, it's not just how to, it's here's how I did it and here's how I do it, because you're actually watching it happen in front of you, which I really appreciated. I thought that was super cool.
Hey, Thomas, you give a lot of great advice in your book. You gave advice that made me a better writer. What were you fucking thinking when you called it Junior?
It was written with juniors in mind because I wrote it to be practical and useful for people who are doing the work day to day. I didn't want it to be written for people who are sitting in a high office and could go, oh yes, indeed, creativity is the answer. I shall tell my subordinates. I wanted it to be something where you're in it. It's that spirit, that energy. You want to actually do the work. You're excited about it. And also it's something that you clutch when times are dark and you like want to go scream or cry in the bathroom and you're just hanging on. I wanted it to be that sort of life preserver that you reached out for. So,
if I may, I'd love to read the very first paragraph in the book. It explains why it is called Junior, and it made me want to buy this book when one of my students in class cracked open your book and read this, and I said, that's going to be a good book. And so, if I may, this is a good answer to why'd you call it what you called it. This is Thomas's words. In most agencies, it's an insult, a slur. From the moment you get in, you want to kill that word off your title, murder it, and have its body wash ashore in Baltimore. You try to mumble it in hopes people will miss it, scratch it off all forms so that others won't see it. Why won't it die? Make the hurt stop. Junior. It's also where the energy of an agency comes from. The title of people willing to do anything it takes, anytime it takes. Sure, I can work this weekend. I can just make it to my next kid's birth. Junior is the pulse, the youth and vibrancy, the bright-eyed puppy dog hope that refuses to be jaded by anything, the fight that makes the subhead on a banner as stellar as the TV spot, the heart. In a perfect agency, we're all juniors. That really is a good piece of writing.
Hey, so I noticed, Thomas, that the book is actually almost like 1,000 really great, well-written ads. But they're written with these like a great headline and then body copy, if you really look at it that way. And there's 1,000 of them, and the writing is so good. How intentional was that? Or is that sort of more of a structural sort of thing you're used to doing, or did you mean to do it that way?
Well, I wanted to keep it concise. There's a lot of these, there's a lot of books out there where there's one amazing chapter and you're like, wow, it's incredible. And then the rest of the book is basically repeating that. I threw out an entire book's worth of book, to get this to what it is. So I wanted to keep everything as tight, as crisp as possible, like an ad where it's as much information as possible condensed into as few words as possible.
So early on in the book, you bring up one of the most fraught topics for juniors and for that matter, people at every level, which is making mistakes. How does the young reader go up against that mindset of I must be perfect, I'm not allowed to make mistakes, and in fact get good with them?
Taking risks and landing something that's not perfect, or kind of coming to your creative director with something that's maybe half formed or is or that you're a little bit nervous to show them, honestly, where you're like, this thing is weird. You might not like it. You might you might think something's wrong with me. It is sort of, that's usually where the magic is in something that's just a little bit off center. And isn't that, is this right? Is this the right answer, or is this, is this genius or terrible? And those lines are usually pretty close. So yeah, I think people should feel okay in the sort of concepting phase to have things that are loose and rough and mistakes, and write down things in your notebooks that maybe aren't going to work or maybe are wrong. In sort of concepting, I think that's with your partner, that's another safe space where you can have a bunch of bad ideas. If you have a good creative director, they can laugh at something and be like, wow, yeah, that was terrible. Okay, let's go to the next thing. And in sort of a positive way. Yeah, and it's also, sometimes you look at those things and you just give it a little shift, and that sort of terrible answer is really cool and really interesting.
But it seems, if I could follow up on that, I think part of what a creative director's job is to look at the 100 things you have and go, there's something right there. I don't know what it is. If it's complete, it's great. But that is your job, is to say that thing right there, go off and explore that. And sometimes you don't see it as a writer. You just have a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that is their job to, you should expect them to be able to do that and find things that you don't see.
I felt like it was one of my finest hours when exactly what you just mentioned happened to me. The summer intern was coming up with ideas for a cereal called Shreddies.
Oh, God.
He had the idea. For some of you watching will know the campaign Diamond Shreddies.
Shreddies are supposed to be square.
Have any of these diamond shapes gone out?
New Diamond Shreddies cereal. Same 100% whole grain wheat in a delicious diamond shape.
He had the idea for Diamond Shreddies, and that I saw it, that I did not throw it on the cutting room floor, right? It's the creative director's finest hour. Yep. You didn't kill it.
Yes.
And went on to be this phenomenon. But he told me later, he said, I came this close to not showing that to you because I thought you would think it was so stupid that I would be fired. So there you go.
I think too, there's something to be said. Thomas, you touched on it. Luke, you touched on it. When you create an environment where there's trust, you can have stupid ideas. Because so many times I've seen stupid ideas in one turn, as Thomas said, turn into something amazing. So it's having the confidence to know you can say anything in front of your partner. And if you've got a great creative director, you should be able to say anything in front of them too.
Cool. You once spoke to my classes, a great lecture you gave. And you showed an example of you were trying to sell a coffee maker. You started off with a whole list of headlines. And then you showed how you thinned that list down to some likely suspects, and then just how you kept polishing it. Is that still how you work? How you think?
Yeah, I always think about headlines as sort of a, it's a tool for communicating something, and that thing is some truth. And when I say truth, for the example of a coffee maker, it's not, coffee is brown, coffee has caffeine. It's sort of, what's the truth about it? What's that thing that makes me go, oh man, that's so right. So it's, sometimes you go to bed and you're just dreaming of that cup of coffee in the morning. That's a truth. Or it's always, there's that one person who's just a little bit more perky than the other person in a household, and they're the person who actually gets up and makes the coffee because they've got that low energy pre-coffee. So it always starts with the truth. And then yeah, you layer on okay, what's an interesting way of saying this? What's an unexpected way of saying this? Just writing a ton and then sort of filtering it back through what of these are just words that maybe sound cool or rhyme versus what's an actual idea that somebody's going to take away and that's going to stick in their brain all the way until they get to the sales shelf.
How do you think that skill lives in social media, Thomas?
So social media in a lot of ways mirrors kind of early dead mediums like print, because it's, you know, it's strong visual and copy. But then in social media, there's also, you know, where it's landing is very important, because it's surrounded by a community, and how is a community going to respond to it, and how can a community interact and sort of engage with it. And I think the more true the statement is, the more people will engage with it, the more excited they'll be about it, or share their own version of it, or get involved in it.
I think one of the interesting things that you talk about is kind of taking your fate in your own hands, right? If you get a shitty brief, and I know it's true from my own career, the things that made me who I am and allowed me to be a creative director are things that I took initiative on, that were either not great assignments, and I made them into something. You talk about that in the book. Talk a little bit about how you think juniors should look at that within the agency culture, where they're supposed to kind of be quiet and learn, but they also have the opportunity to make things happen.
Yeah, I think it's always the really bad assignments where the sort of magic is hidden, because nobody pays attention to it. It kind of can slip through. You can really get something interesting on it, because everyone's like, well, it's this thing over here, and we got this big shiny, you know, Super Bowl spot happening over here, so nobody pays attention to this little thing over here. And sometimes you can do great stuff on that. Other times it's just because you did something great on this little thing that nobody thought about. They're like, oh, you know, that person did something really cool. Maybe we bring them into the next thing. And you know, some of the best work that I did was I worked on an auto show brochure, which was maybe the least sexy thing you could possibly work on. But because of that, when it came time to do this, you know, huge multi-million-dollar campaign, I was the only person who knew anything about the car, because I did the auto show brochure, so they had to put me on it. So you know, it's sort of, there's always these moments where, yeah, just working on that thing that nobody expects to be great can be great.
You know what knocked me out once was when a junior had the audacity to tell me, the big boss, that the brief sucked. They didn't know any better, right? I love it. I love it. So and he didn't say it that way. He was very respectful. He's just like, I just am confused. I just don't understand how this brief is really setting up the product to have success. And he really thoughtfully just said, I find this really hard to work with. And I approved the brief, so I didn't write it, but I had approved it. And I had to get over myself, you know. And he was right. He's absolutely right. And I just loved that. I would love to see more juniors go ahead and speak their truth. And what better moment than when you have a terrible brief in front of you?
I've noticed in those conversations that oftentimes, because I've had people say that to me as well, and when you start explaining it, you go, oh, I think we just rewrote the brief, because I explained it to you in a way that makes more sense. This is what we intended. So I think that's important. But I also, Thomas, you actually talk, I'm gonna misarticulate it because you articulated it so well, about taking a shitty brief and turning it into your own thing. Talk a little bit about how you recommend kids do that.
Yeah, there are terrible briefs, and there's all sorts of different ways to to sort of approach them. I think one is just, if you just go and you sit with the strategist and you know, not in the meeting, call them out, go sit in their office and say, you know what, I've got a few questions about that brief, and really just start picking at it and just say, and tell me more about that. And then, like, maybe I'm just like missing it, and just sort of have the conversation. A lot of times you'll come to a new brief, and there'll be this aha moment, and other times you'll realize maybe they actually were saying something interesting, but they're not writers, so that's not how they're not able to condense it into this perfect one sentence. But when you're sitting there and you unpack it with them, and you say, oh, so you're saying blah blah blah, and you say it in your perfect copywriter way, they go, yeah, that's the thing I was trying to say.
If I might interject a point, because you just landed on something I think is huge. It's one thing to sit in the creative department and bag on the brief as being shitty, and another thing to go sit down with the person who wrote it and shut the door and say, I'm having trouble with this. And I've had more success with planners who realized, I didn't go to everybody else and call the brief shitty. I went to them and said, I'm having trouble with it. And I almost always walked out of that room feeling like I then had something I could use. So I totally agree with you on that, Thomas. And I think it's a very bad habit creatives can fall into early, to sit around and complain about the brief to everybody but the person who can do something about it.
Did you work at Crispin during the glory years when everybody worked all the time, it slept in their offices? And if so, what was good or bad about that?
I sort of allude to it in my book. It's not just a turn of phrase that people slept in their office. I literally slept in my office for a few weeks. I was in Miami when Katrina hit, and it wiped out all the power in the place that I was staying. So I was in it was 90 degrees in the summer in Miami, and I didn't have power in my place, and I was working 16-hour days. So I said, well, might as well just live here. They had showers at the agency. I slept under my desk on a piece of foam that was left over from a hamburger costume that the agency had made for one of their campaigns. If you can't outthink them, you can outwork them. Yeah.
So I think one of the questions that I have about this whole subject is, what should kids expect right now from the industry? Because having been in it a long time, I've seen a real change in the last 10 years away from the sweatshop. You just don't see it as much anymore. Yet you still hear about it at certain agencies, that certain agencies are still doing it. But I know that speaking to a lot of kids are not willing to do it. And I don't think that's bad. I think that there's you should do it because it's advancing your career. To your point, I think saying it should be your choice is the right answer for all of these kids. But it should be advancing your career, not destroying your life, if you're going to do that. And if it's not advancing your career, you should not do it.
I think there's a whole generation now who are saying, fuck that shit. It's time for the industry to conform to the reasonable voices, the majority of voices at this point, who are saying it's not worth having no life. And thank you very much. I'll go work in another job or another industry. So it really is a new day, and I think it's fantastic.
My question for Thomas is, what's your favorite line in the book?
My favorite line in the book is, there's only so long you can dance with a corpse before people get suspicious. And that's about, sometimes there's just some really just nasty product language that they're forcing you to use verbatim in your ad, and it's best to just get it in there. Don't linger.
The version I go with is, when you have to eat a turd, don't nibble.
Yeah.
One of the other things that, not taking away from the fact that the book is extremely well written, it's also so beautifully designed, Thomas. And I remember when I saw it, I had such a visceral reaction to it, because it really felt like somebody really knew what they were doing, put that book together. And then when I talked to, I realized that somebody was you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I talked to an amazing designer, and what I said was, this book doesn't read like a typical ad book. It doesn't, feel like a typical marketing book. I didn't want it to look like one. I wanted it to feel like a little premium. I wanted it to be like an object. I wanted it to be something that people saw on someone else's desk and picked up. I wanted the book to function like an ad, because that's what we all do for a living. I didn't want it to be ugly. So Anna Koshnik is the name of the designer. She was amazing. She's a friend of mine.
And you made the most of that beautiful design with your own social advertising. For instance, those images, I'm going to be showing them here. Those images that were just, the book itself looked, as you said, premium.
I think you treat it as a piece of art when you're promoted out there. And I think that's also an aha. You're just not slapping the cover in front of people.
So thank you to everyone for making me seem like an extrovert for a little bit here. Really appreciate it. And all of these books from all of these fine people are available on the internet at the http www.amazon.com.
HTTP.
All of these books are available on the internet.
Also available at a place called Kindle. I haven't been there myself.
I typed it into MapQuest and I could not find the Kindle, but you can get it at your local bookstore as well.
Just drive over to Amazon.
Drive over to Amazon and pick it up.